Kay Cloud and her husband Kenneth were a quiet, unassuming couple.
They're very frugal with what they have.
And what they had was a massive farm and a valuable estate.
Over 200 acres of ground.
At least $2 million.
But after nearly 15 years of marriage, a final meal.
They walked out together, arm in arm.
Ended in tragedy.
She heard a pop, looked in, and he's bleeding.
Finding the killer would take years.
They did a good job in hiding it.
Send the police searching for a fortune in missing cash. And reveal that Kay's quiet farm wife facade masked a sordid secret.
He kind of swooped in and swept me off my feet.
She looked like a grandmother, just a sweet older lady who wouldn't hurt a fly.
Going to one of the pharmacies.
And then, after picking up her father-in-law's medication, Kay and her husband had gone to dinner at a local chain.
They went to Burgers and Beer.
Their meal finished, the couple had paid their tab and left the restaurant.
They walked out together, described as arm in arm.
What happened next, no one in the restaurant saw, since Kenneth had parked around the side of the building.
Away from the front where all the windows were and where anybody could see the parking lot.
But several patrons did hear it.
They heard like a pow pow sound. They didn't know exactly what had went on. They didn't know what it was.
Not until moments later, when Kay rushed through the front door.
Back into the restaurant with blood on her.
Kay Cloud was screaming and calling for help and wanting someone to call 911.
Although she appeared so distraught that just why Kay wanted an ambulance wasn't entirely clear.
And there's kind of a hysteria within the restaurant itself as a result of that.
However, when Kay rushed back out the front door, several patrons did follow.
They actually had went outside and saw Lois K. Cloud, basically tending to Ken. They saw the glass on the ground, the bullet hole in the truck.
Kay's husband had just been shot.
He was slumped over on the driver's side.
And the search for his shooter would lead the investigators deep into the couple's finances, send them searching for an elusive con man, and leave Kay facing some very uncomfortable questions about the state of her marriage. Yuma was a much smaller town when Kay was born back in 1949.
It was a very small community when we were growing up. It's grown into a pretty good-sized city.
For Kay, however, growing up had come with a steep learning curve. By age 26, she had been married and divorced twice and was struggling to raise her daughter on a bank teller's salary.
Customer service, that's what she did. She opened up CDs and IRAs and new accounts.
And day after day of handling other people's money left her hungry for a better life.
Kay always seemed to want more.
And in 1976, the 26-year-old found what she was looking for when Kenneth Cloud stepped up to her teller window one morning. 7 years older than Kay, Kenneth had grown up around Yuma, too.
We lived in Yuma until I was 8 years old. Then we moved to Bard, California, which is just across the river.
Raised in a farm family, country life for Kenneth wasn't so much idyllic as it was labor-intensive.
The boys always had to work on the farm when they got out of school.
We weren't into funning, fishing, sports. We were more into working. We had to work on the farms on the weekend.
After high school, Kenneth spent some time at junior college, got married, and got a job with the Federal Bureau of Land Reclamation.
Which is the irrigation and all that.
We have a huge agriculture industry here.
Yuma's the lettuce capital of the world for the winter months.
Running water projects in a farming community like Yuma was an important job. But just like Kay, Kenneth dreamed of bigger things.
Kenny wanted to be a rich farmer.
Kenneth started small, setting a little money aside from his salary every month to invest in land.
They're very frugal. They didn't have anything, so they're very frugal with what they have.
He was not a big spender. Kenneth kind of had a tight lid on his funds.
And thanks to that tight lid, Kenneth was soon able to take the first step toward achieving his dream.
He acquired a small 20-acre parcel with a house. He remodeled the house and lived in the house.
It wasn't an easy life, especially for Kenneth's first wife, raising the couple's 4 kids on an isolated farm.
He's working all the time. It's out in the middle of nowhere.
And that may have explained what happened to their marriage.
I don't know what the cause was. All of a sudden, they're broke up, And you just don't ask questions.
Whatever the reason, Kenneth's ex took the kids and moved out shortly before he met Kay at the bank in 1976. And Kay was the sort of woman a newly divorced man might notice.
She always looked pretty. She always had bleached hair, fingernails, pedicures, and nice clothes.
Kenneth immediately caught Kay's eye, too.
Kenny was a tall, nice-looking man, curly hair, always nice and neat.
And when Kenneth asked her out, Kay not only said yes, within a year, they were living together.
She seemed like a nice lady.
She and I got along fabulously. We had good times. She seemed to fit in.
She also got along well with Kenneth's kids.
Some of them would come down and spend the summers with him.
And in their absence, Kenneth became a second father to Kay's daughter.
Basically, Kenny raised her.
And in 1983, he officially became her stepfather.
They were together for 7 years before they finally married.
Although long before then, Kay had already settled into the role of a hard-working farmer's wife.
She was a good wife, like from the 50s, she made dinner and took care of the kids.
It wasn't the 50s, though. It was the 80s, and in addition to being a dutiful wife, Kay also had a job, one she enjoyed and even excelled at.
She was extremely respected at the bank, very highly respected, and very easy to work with.
2 incomes to support the family made it easier for Kenneth to expand the farm, too.
He kept acquiring ground and ended up with over 200 acres of ground.
In fact, by 1994, Kenneth had acquired so much land that after 30 years of working for the Bureau of Land Reclamation, he retired at 52 and devoted himself to farming full-time.
He was just living his dream.
He wasn't just a retiree puttering around his property, though. He took farming seriously.
Kenny Cloud was a very, very good farmer.
He was also a good businessman, investing in even more land than he could personally farm.
He was getting $150,000 a year, leasing that land. The company was coming in growing lettuce.
Kenneth and Kay were still as frugal as ever, though. Despite the money rolling in, they saved most of it or invested it in more land.
He had some money, so he was not hurting in that aspect, but he wasn't going to waste it.
And after 20 years together, Kay was well accustomed to Kenneth's frugal ways.
Kay knew what Kenny was like.
But that didn't stop her from teasing him about it a little.
She called him a tight one.
And one look around their farm revealed that it was true. Kay and Kenneth still lived in the same modest farmhouse he had remodeled decades earlier.
I wouldn't have lived in it, but it was a cute little house. It's a starter house for some of these kids today.
They certainly could have afforded a bigger house. But now that Kay's daughter was grown, what was the need? By 1997, Kay and Kenneth were on their way to being a pair of extremely well-off empty nesters.
He was worth at least $2 million.
Not that they were looking to move into a retirement community or beach resort.
Farm life was very much in him and all of the family.
And moving into the city wasn't really an option either. By Kenneth's standards, even Yuma had become too big.
One time it was pretty much a rural community, but it's now grown into like a mid-sized city.
Instead, when Kenneth finally gave up farming, the plan was to spend their final years far from Yuma.
When he retired, that they were going to go up to the property that their family held up in Colorado.
That may have been the plan, but Kenneth wouldn't live to see it. In December of 1997, a quick trip into town would take a sudden, potentially deadly turn. Coming up, police get a lead on Kenneth's shooter.
And the way she describes him, it's like the light bulb comes on.
But will his trail lead back to Kay?
And he was expecting some money, so he wanted to have a bank account.
On the night of December 9th, 1997, police and paramedics rushed to a restaurant in the suburbs of Yuma, Arizona. A patron had just been shot in the parking lot.
This is something that doesn't happen in a small community.
When the police arrived at the scene, they found a distraught Kay Cloud in the parking lot, being attended to by a small crowd of customers.
All kind of emotions are going on.
She did a lot of yelling and screaming.
And the 48-year-old was screaming because her husband was slumped over the steering wheel of their truck, bleeding from a single gunshot wound to the neck.
The shot was through the driver's side, and it seemed like he was already in the process of putting the keys in the ignition.
Kay had also been injured, but not seriously.
The bullet hit the dash, the copper jacket, tripped off the bullet, hit her in the bottom lip, and cut her lip.
However, since her injuries weren't life-threatening, she stayed behind and spoke briefly with the investigators while the paramedics rushed Kenneth to the hospital.
She was a witness, and you're trying to get initial information, just trying to get something to work with.
Kay told the investigators that she and Kenneth had driven into Yuma to run a few errands that afternoon and stopped off for dinner before heading back to their farm.
Kay Cloud and her husband were at dinner at Burgers and Beer. When they finished dinner, walked out to the parking lot.
Ken had already walked around and gotten in the pickup.
And according to Kay, as she walked around to the passenger door and opened it,
That's when the shot was fired.
She heard a pop, looked in, and he slumped over the seat bleeding.
not only that, Kay realized that she was bleeding too.
The way she described it, something hit her in the lip and it was hot, and it did cut her lip.
According to Kay, the rest was a blur. She remembered running into the restaurant for help.
And that's when people came out and the police were called.
But there was one thing she didn't remember.
She did not see the individual that actually shot her husband.
Since she had little else to give them, the investigators sent Kay to the hospital to have her wounds treated, and so that the doctors could give her the terrible news. Kenneth was dead.
Mr. Cloud had succumbed to his injury.
The police were now investigating a murder. So once Kay's lip had been tended to, they brought her into the station for a formal statement.
And I started talking with her about what happened, and I noticed how she was kind of flat.
He thought it was very suspicious that she was there, yet some of her reactions at the time didn't really fit the grieving widow kind of reactions that you would get.
It was a marked contrast to her hysterics at the crime scene.
Yelling and screaming because of what happened.
Of course, the shooting outside the restaurant and the news of her husband's death had taken a lot out of her. But the police were determined to get a few more answers from her. Specifically, how could she have not seen the person who shot her husband?
I felt it hard to believe that she didn't see that.
Anytime a firecracker or a gun goes off, you're going to look and see what it is. She just didn't see anything.
In fact, she hardly had to look up, considering she had been getting in the passenger side of the truck when the shooter had approached the driver's side door.
The way the vehicle was faced and the way she was faced, you would suspect that she would have seen the individual coming up to the truck.
Asked point blank by the investigators how it was possible she didn't see the shooter, Kay had an answer, just not one that the investigators expected.
Her response was, well, I'm blonde.
Was it possible Kay was making light of her husband's murder?
She wasn't as emotional as I thought she might have been.
Or was there an entirely innocent explanation?
She witnessed this horrible, horrible shooting that took her husband's life and that she was left a widow.
She had been sedated mildly to kind of calm her down.
Either way, the investigators weren't laughing. Instead, they came back with a question that snapped Kay out of her apparent trance.
I said, who's having an affair, you or him? And her eyes automatically opened up wide. I was like, wait a minute.
Kay denied that she was having an affair, but said she wasn't sure about her husband.
She said she wasn't, but then she tried to move it on to maybe Kenny was having an affair.
Although, when pressed, she could offer no specifics.
We really didn't get any farther than that, other than I said I'd be in touch with her, and the interview ended.
Less than 12 hours after Kenneth Cloud's murder, the investigators appeared at a loss. Their one witness hadn't seen the shooter. But then, just as they feared they might never get so much as a basic description, a neighborhood canvass the next morning led police to a witness who'd been riding his bike through the restaurant parking lot the night before.
As he was cutting through the parking lot, he heard a pop. He thought someone was breaking in a car and had broken a car window. He turns and looks, and he sees a guy putting something in his waistband.
The witness described the man as a heavy-set Hispanic male, around 35 or 40 years old, which for a farming town just over the border from Mexico didn't exactly narrow things down. Not only were half the city's permanent residents Hispanic.
We have a large transient population, the agricultural workers.
However, migrant workers weren't all that crossed the border.
We've had gang violence coming across the border, narcotics issues.
Was it possible that Kenneth had gotten tangled up with Mexican drug cartels? A quick check of his background didn't give any indications.
Nothing that would indicate why Kenneth Cloud was dead. No mob connections, there wasn't any drug connections.
The description of the shooter appeared to be a dead end. So with no promising leads, the investigators appealed to the community for help.
We had put out information into the news media about this murder, and we were looking for information.
And 3 days after the shooting, the investigators got a call from a woman named Charlene, whose husband was a deputy sheriff in a nearby county. She told the investigators that they ought to look into a man named Vincent Accardo.
In the way she describes him, it's like a light bulb comes on. This description kind of matches the guy this kid saw.
According to Charlene, she had met Accardo almost 2 years earlier when he had first arrived in Yuma.
When Cardo first came into town, he reported himself to be a millionaire.
But he was an odd sort of millionaire.
Said he was worth all this money. He didn't have any of it because it was all tied up.
He didn't even have a suitcase with clothes in it. He only had the clothes on his back.
And there was a reason, according to what Charlene told the police. Accardo's alleged millions didn't exist.
Vincent Accardo was just nothing but a scammer.
He had documents that were all forged, fake anyway, showing that he was worth all this money.
Charlene knew he was a con man now, but not back in 1996. In fact, she told the investigators that she had even introduced him to someone she knew at a local bank.
Vincent Accardo was expecting some money, so he wanted to have a bank account set up.
This guy professed he was coming into this inheritance, $10 million.
And that was the real reason Charlene suggested the investigators look into Accardo. Because according to Charlene, the banker she had introduced the con man to was Lois K. Cloud. Coming up, the investigators uncover a possible motive.
The property she kept selling, it was supposed to go to the kids.
And Kay starts feeling the heat.
What do we do?
By December 12, 1997, it had been 72 hours since Lois K. Cloud's husband, Kenneth, had been shot dead outside a Yuma, Arizona restaurant.
According to her, she didn't see anything.
But another witness had seen a heavy-set Hispanic male leaving the scene.
The individual took off and ran and fled the area.
And now, the investigators had just received what appeared to be a promising tip. A woman had come forward with information that a little over a year earlier, she had introduced Kay Cloud to a man who matched the description of the shooter, Vincent Accardo.
He had gone to the bank that Kay Cloud had worked at and tried to show that he was a huge financial investor.
It wasn't true. According to the caller, Accardo was a con artist.
He was trying to scam the bank.
Was it possible that Accardo had gone from con man to hitman? When the investigators followed up on the tip, they made a surprising discovery about the night of the murder.
We found that Vincent Accardo had come to Yuma and that he was staying across from Burgers and Beer.
And then, a couple days later, a customer service rep from a local car rental agency contacted the investigators with some more interesting information.
Kay Cloud had rented a vehicle a few days prior to the murder.
The vehicle was returned on the day of the murder.
And when the investigators went to the rental car agency, the clerk told them something else, too.
There was a man with her. And I had a photograph of Vincent Accardo. That's who was with her.
Only hours before her husband was murdered, Kay Cloud had been with a man who matched the description of the killer.
Now, you know she's not telling you the truth, she's withholding something.
Convinced that Kay knew far more about her husband's murder than she had led them to believe, the investigators quietly contacted several of Ken's friends and family. And what they learned hinted at a possible motive. Kenneth wasn't just a successful farmer and millionaire. He was a miser. Friends and family told the investigators that despite all his financial success, Kenneth had stayed true to his frugal country roots.
He didn't want to spend any money.
In fact, Kenneth was so tight-fisted that whenever he and Kay went out to dinner, she had to pick up the check with the money she made at the bank.
Kenny would always say that Kay had to pay for dinner because she wanted to go.
And the same was true for new clothes, a new car, or a new house. Whatever Kay wanted to spend money on, Kenneth was against it.
She wanted to move into town and do something nice, and he wouldn't do it.
And the property up in Colorado that they were planning to retire to, according to the family, that had been Kenneth's dream, not Kay's.
She was just livid that he would spend money on property up in Colorado.
The couple's fight over money wasn't mere bickering either. According to the family, the marriage had been in trouble, so much so that just before the murder, Kay and Kenneth had even sought counseling.
That weekend before, they'd gone to Phoenix to a retreat to try to work out their marital problems.
Apparently, the retreat hadn't gone well, at least not according to what Kenneth had told his brother.
Just a few days before he was murdered, he told me that his wife took $6,000 out of the account and was planning on leaving.
Of course, Kay didn't leave, and that led the investigators to suspect she had done something else with that $6,000. Hire Vincent Accardo.
She paid him to kill her husband.
That's what the investigators believed. So after uncovering the information about her troubled marriage and the rental car, the investigators brought Kay in for another round of questioning.
I confronted her about renting a car for this guy. That's when she came out and she said yes, that they were friends and that he'd come to town and she'd rented the car for him.
Kay even admitted that she had visited Accardo at his hotel room prior to the shooting. Although according to her, it was entirely innocent.
I started inside just kind of chuckling to myself, saying, yeah, right, you know.
As far as the investigators were concerned, everything was falling into place. But the prosecutors weren't so sure just yet. Was their circumstantial case enough to convince a jury?
We just couldn't get to the next step as far as, proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
What they needed was Vincent Accardo.
If I arrest her for conspiracy, it's not going to go anywhere because I don't have the shooter.
And if Kay had paid Accardo to kill her husband, the investigators figured they knew a pretty good way to find him.
We started looking at the Cloud finances and the money trail.
Although, when they looked into Kay's finances, the investigators soon realized that the money trail wouldn't be hard to follow. Barely more than a week after Ken's murder, Kay was moving money around at an astonishing pace.
She was spending a lot on just luxurious items that she never ever purchased before.
She moved into town. She bought her a new car. She bought her daughter a new car.
And thanks to Kenneth's sizable estate and a lifetime's worth of valuable assets, she could easily afford it.
She had sold 120 acres of property for around $1 million. not long after the murder had taken place.
She also sold Kenneth's prized Colorado property, the place where he dreamed of retiring.
She, almost immediately sold that piece of property. She literally gave it away because she did not get out of it what they paid for it.
Kenneth's family was appalled, and not just because of the bad deals that Kay made.
The property that they had, she kept selling, and of course it was supposed to go to the kids.
Kay's rapid liquidation of Kenneth's assets appeared to confirm the investigators' suspicion about her motive. But even more interesting, buried within her financial records were numerous payouts to the suspected hitman.
She was writing checks out to Vincent Accardo. These amounts were anywhere from hundreds of dollars to thousands of dollars.
She had also bought him a motorcycle and a Lincoln Continental.
They went to the dealers. The motorcycle, when she bought it for him, she registered it to Vincent.
We knew they were together. We knew they were seeing each other.
Despite the money trail connecting Kay and Vincent, the investigators were unable to find him.
He fled Yuma.
And even a subpoena of Kay's phone records failed to reveal where he was.
They did a good job in hiding themselves. They did a good job in not talking.
And with Accardo gone underground, most likely living under an alias, the case began to grow cold. Months passed, and then years. But even as Kay continued living off the proceeds of her husband's murder, Kenneth's family and the Yuma police were determined to see that she wouldn't get away with it.
We would come in about every 2 or 3 months, wanting to know what was going on with the case.
And 5 years later, at the end of 2002, the latest batch of phone records provided a solid lead.
We get the records, and we're looking at it, and pow, there's a number we've never seen before.
Kay had finally slipped up, revealing just how she had kept her contact with Accardo hidden. She had a secret phone, a prepaid burner.
What tripped her up on that was she used her regular cell phone, the number we had, and apparently she was checking her voicemail on the secret phone, and that's how that number came up.
And now that they had the number, the investigators were able to pull the records for it. They revealed that it was being used almost exclusively to call one number, a residential landline in McAllen, Texas. Had the authorities finally found the elusive Accardo? A short stakeout of the house confirmed it.
He was living in a very affluent neighborhood, in a gated community.
Puzzled, the Yuma police obtained a warrant to tap the phone at the McAllen house.
Once the phones were wiretapped, Yuma police were able to listen in on the conversations between Lois K. Cloud and Vincent Accardo.
But would they ever mention the murder? After more than 5 years, there was no guarantee. So the investigators came up with a plan to prod things along.
Our plan was to put an article in the newspaper about the murder.
As predicted, the appearance of the article on April 26, 2003, prompted Kay to place a call to Vincent, a worried call.
There's a picture of Vincent Accardo on the front page. And they said they would like to talk to him.
There's a long pause, and his words were, "They're closer than I thought."
Vincent's response sent Kay into a panic.
I am sick at my stomach. I am gonna die. What do we do?
Then, as the investigators listened in, Accardo urged Kay to sell the last of the farmland she'd inherited from her husband.
One minute it would be, "I love you." The next minute it would be him trying to elicit as much money that he could from K. Cloud.
She said just as soon as she could get the rest of the property sold, she would give him the money and they would run off together.
There was absolutely no doubt, listen to those wiretaps, that Vincent Accardo murdered Kenneth Cloud. There's absolutely no doubt that K. Cloud knew about that.
However, despite Vincent's assurances to Kay that they would run off together, it didn't appear that he would wait for her. On April 28th, while the Arizona and Texas authorities were arranging for arrest warrants and extradition, The detectives keeping the McAllen house under surveillance watched as Vincent loaded up his SUV.
He's made some comments early on that he may flee, so we were definitely concerned about that.
In fact, he almost made it to the border before the police pulled him over and made the arrest.
It was just outside Brownsville, Texas, that we made the decision.
That same day, detectives in Yuma knocked on the door of the new home Lois K. Cloud had bought after her husband's death.
She answers the door. I said, Kay Cloud, you're under arrest for the murder of Kenneth Cloud.
Coming up, can the prosecutors convict Kay?
She looked like a grandmother who wouldn't hurt a fly.
Or can she convince the jury that Accardo acted alone?
I was asking to kill my husband.
On February 25, 2010, Lois K. Cloud finally went on trial for murder. It had been 12 years since her husband had been gunned down outside a Yuma, Arizona restaurant, and 7 long years of legal maneuvering had passed since her arrest.
It went on for many years. Well-known family. The death sentence was being sought. It was such a huge ordeal.
And the ordeal had aged Kay considerably.
She looked like a grandmother, just a sweet, older lady who wouldn't hurt a fly.
The fact that the 60-year-old made an unlikely-looking killer wasn't the only thing working in her favor. The man she was accused of hiring to commit the murder wouldn't be testifying against her. Arrested in 2003, he'd refused to turn on Kay or confess to the crime.
It was a little bit frustrating that I couldn't get that last bit of information to say he pulled the trigger.
However, Vincent Accardo's denials didn't prevent him from being tried and convicted of Kenneth's murder in 2008.
Vincent Accardo was given the death penalty for his role in the murder.
Now, 2 years later, the prosecutor opened Kay's trial by telling the jury that she was just as guilty.
She wanted her husband dead.
And according to the prosecution, it was no coincidence that she had hired Accardo to kill him.
She was having an affair with him.
It was, in fact, the one thing that Accardo had confessed to after his arrest.
Are you in love with Kay? It was just an affair.
And according to the prosecutors, that's why Kay had paid for the hit on her husband. They called the investigators to the stand to explain how Kay had paid off Accardo in a series of installments, starting with that first $6,000 she had withdrawn from the bank days before the murder.
And I said, well, did you give Accardo any of the money? And she said, no. And then I asked her, well, what did you do with the money? And she never did answer that question.
And Kenneth and Kay's Last Supper. According to the prosecution, it was all a setup. They claim that when she walked out of the restaurant with her husband that night, Kay knew what was coming.
They even separated with a kiss. I remember thinking that was a Judas kiss.
Although she gained much more than 30 pieces of silver from her husband's death.
She was the sole inheritor of the property. She was the inheritor of a life insurance policy.
They had a forensic accountant who went through Kay Cloud's financial records, and they did an accounting of how much money they could track.
And then there was the money they couldn't track, almost $600,000.
Prosecutors believe a major portion of it, if not all of it, went to Accardo.
But the most dramatic moment of the prosecution's case came when they played the jury tapes of the intercepted phone calls between Kay and Accardo.
As the wiretaps, the phone calls were played to the jury, there was a lot of shock. There was a lot of mouths that were open.
But did the fact that Kay and Accardo were talking prove that they had planned his murder together? When the defense started presenting its case, they argued that Accardo had acted alone.
There was no actual physical evidence of her, being involved in the crime.
And the reason was simple, according to the defense.
She had been preyed upon by a con man.
He got the thought that she was another white victim and took advantage.
To explain just how she had been taken advantage of, her attorneys called Kay to testify in her own defense.
She was always very calm, but there were some times that she got emotional.
Especially when she talked about her relationship with Kenneth. On the stand, she insisted that she loved her husband, even when he was a hard man to love.
She told the jury that Ken was at times mean to her. He was very, very involved with his agriculture, his farm. So she felt like at times she was neglected.
I think she just got really lonely.
And then Vincent Accardo had walked into the bank where she worked.
She talked about how he seemed very charming when she first met him.
Although according to Kay, she hadn't immediately succumbed to his charms. Kay told the jury that despite his advances, they were only friends.
She said that they did start talking and stuff, but it was nothing really intimate.
But Kay claimed that hadn't stopped her from making an intimate confession to Accardo in November of 1997. According to Kay, she told Accardo that she was planning to leave her husband.
She said it wasn't the loving relationship that it was when they first got together.
And a few weeks after she'd supposedly told Accardo about her marital troubles, Kenneth was dead.
She became extremely emotional, I remember, when she talked about the night that he was shot. She had a breakdown on the stand, whether it was from guilt or whether that was because she genuinely loved him.
Then, once she recovered her composure, Kay said that she had confronted Accardo about the shooting.
I was asking to kill my husband, and he was fairly calm. Not probably calmer than I would have been, but he said no.
The question was asked is if she thought that Vincent Accardo was the person that killed her husband, and she said no. But why would she want to confront him and ask him if he did it? To which she replied she just wanted to hear him say no.
She also wanted his sympathy and companionship, which Accardo was more than happy to provide.
On the stand, she admitted that she had an affair with Vincent Lee Accardo.
He kind of swooped in and swept me off my feet.
Was he a smooth talker?
Very much so.
He led her to believe that he loved her, that they would be together.
And as for the thousands of dollars in cash and gifts that she'd given him,
her response was if she can afford to help someone out and give them something, she will.
And she'd believed that her new boyfriend had needed help desperately.
He said he had connections to the Chicago Mafia, and he had a huge gambling debt that needed to be paid, and he had people looking for him over it.
When he told me somebody was going to come knocking on my door, I didn't think about the police department, I thought about the Mafia. And that's what I was thinking about.
According to Kay, that was why she had taken such elaborate precautions to keep their relationship secret.
He had a pager and she had a pager. There was codes being sent back and forth to each other.
It also explained why she hadn't told anyone what she and Accardo had done in July of 1998, just 7 months after her husband's murder.
They were married July 29th in San Diego.
Not that the marriage was legal. As it turned out, Accardo had been married several times before and never divorced.
The defense, of course, used that to their advantage because they said, he took advantage of these women before her.
And now, Kay told the jury, she realized that Vincent Accardo had been taking advantage of her all along.
He was a manipulative, evil man. He was in it for himself, and that was a very selfish man.
She was conned out of all this money, with empty, broken promises from Vincent Accardo.
That's what Kay claimed, at least. Now the question was whether or not the jury would believe it. Coming up, after 13 long years, Kenneth's family hopes justice will finally prevail.
I'm a great believer in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
But will those hopes be dashed?
I do remember seeing Kenneth's family members just really upset.
On August 13, 2010, the jury announced that it had reached a verdict in the trial of Lois K. Cloud. The 60-year-old was charged with the murder of her husband, Kenneth, who'd been shot dead outside a Yuma, Arizona restaurant in 1997.
The prosecution argued that it was a contract killing.
But the defense argued that the man she was accused of hiring, Vincent Accardo, had simply exploited Kay, bilking her out of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
The defense's position on this case was basically that Lois K. Cloud was another victim. She would basically, kind of become a pawn to him, that he played her to get that money.
Which side would the jury believe?
We, the jury, do find Lois K. Cloud guilty of first-degree murder.
After 13 years, Kenneth's family finally had the verdict they'd long hoped for.
Kenneth's family, I saw them hugging each other, when the verdict was read.
But would they still be celebrating when Kay was sentenced?
They wanted the death penalty.
I'm a great believer in eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
On October 20th, 2010, the judge sentenced Kay Cloud to life in prison without parole.
I do remember seeing some of Kenneth's family members just really upset when that sentence came out.
Although even those who wanted Kay to pay with her life admit that the crime probably wouldn't have happened if she hadn't met Vincent Accardo.
Vincent Accardo murdered Kenneth Cloud for money. Lois K. Cloud murdered Kenneth for love.
He was quite a con artist, and Kay fell hook, line, and sinker.
On the evening of November 16th, 1994, a woman sat inside a car somewhere near Vicenza, Italy, trying to stay alive. For hours, she had been trapped with a man she barely knew. What had begun as a seemingly ordinary encounter had turned into something terrifying. She had been threatened, restrained, and forced to endure a nightmare that appeared to have no end. Every passing minute brought with it a single, unbearable question: would she leave this car alive? The woman was Gabrielle Muster, an Austrian sex worker. The man behind the wheel was Gianfranco Stevenin. At that moment, neither Muster nor the police officers who would soon enter the story could have known that this encounter was about to expose one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern Italian history. The road stretched ahead through the darkness of northern Italy. The headlights cut through the night as the vehicle moved toward the Vicenza Ovis toll booth. To anyone watching from a distance, it would have looked entirely ordinary. Just another car on another road. Nothing about it suggested fear, desperation, or the possibility that hidden beneath the quiet countryside of Veneto were secrets that would soon shock an entire nation. Inside the vehicle, however, the atmosphere was very different. Muster understood that she was dealing with a dangerous man. According to the investigation that followed, Stevenin had offered money for nude photographs and sexual services. Instead, he had taken her to an isolated location. There, he allegedly tied her up, threatened her with a knife, and subjected her to violent sexual abuse over the course of several hours. The situation had become increasingly dangerous. Resistance could provoke further violence. Compliance offered no guarantee of survival. In circumstances like these, people often search desperately for a way to buy time. Time can become the difference between life and death. At some point during her captivity, Muster proposed a deal. She told Stevenin that she would give him all of her savings, approximately 25 million lire, if he released her. Whether she believed he would actually accept the offer is impossible to know. What is clear is that the promise created an opportunity. It introduced a new objective. It persuaded him to continue driving rather than ending the encounter where it stood. And so the car continued toward Vicenza. The promise of money may have sounded convincing to Stevenin. To Muster, it may have represented something else entirely, a chance. a chance to reach a populated area, a chance to encounter other people, a chance to escape. As the vehicle approached the toll station, the surroundings changed. The isolation of the earlier location gave way to a place where strangers might be present. Traffic moved through designated lanes. Employees worked nearby. Most importantly, police officers happened to be in the area. For someone searching desperately for help, it was perhaps the first sign of hope she had seen all night. Then came the moment that would alter everything. The vehicle stopped. Muster acted. She opened the door and ran. Not later. Not after another conversation. Not after another threat. Immediately, she fled from the car and raced toward a nearby police vehicle. In only a few seconds, the balance of power that had defined the entire night collapsed. The woman who had spent hours trapped with a dangerous man was suddenly surrounded by people who could protect her. The officers intervened. Stevenin was arrested. At first, the case appeared straightforward. Police believed they were dealing with a violent sexual offender. The allegations against him were already serious. There was enough evidence to justify immediate action. Muster's account painted a picture of brutality, coercion, and fear. Investigators had every reason to pursue the case aggressively. Yet nobody involved understood the true significance of what had just happened. The arrest of Gianfranco Stevenin was not the end of an investigation. It was the beginning. In many criminal cases, an arrest marks the moment when uncertainty begins to disappear. Evidence is gathered, witnesses are interviewed, and the truth gradually comes into focus. In this case, however, every answer uncovered a deeper mystery. Who exactly was Gianfranco Stevenin? On paper, he appeared unremarkable. He lived in Tarazzo, a small town in the province of Verona. He came from a farming background. He lived on a substantial family property. Neighbors reportedly viewed him as polite and reserved. There was no obvious public image of a monster. Yet investigators would soon discover that appearances can be dangerously misleading. The search of his property revealed a world that few people had ever seen. Thousands of photographs, detailed records, personal belongings linked to women, collections of hair, items preserved and organized with unsettling care. Each discovery raised new questions. Why had he documented so many women? Why were some of those women missing? Why did certain names continue to appear in the investigation? The deeper detectives looked, the darker the picture became. What initially appeared to be evidence of obsession gradually began to resemble evidence of something far more sinister. Then came the discovery that transformed suspicion into horror. Human remains. Buried. Hidden. Scattered across locations connected to the farm. The quiet agricultural property in Tarazzo was no longer simply the home of an arrested suspect. It became the center of a murder investigation that would captivate Italy and horrify the public. Investigators identified several victims. Among them were Biljana Pavlovich, Claudia Pulejo, and Blaženka Smolijo. Other remains belonged to women who could not immediately be identified. Another woman, Roswitha Adlisnik, had disappeared after reportedly being seen with Stevenin, though her body was never found. As the evidence accumulated, an increasingly disturbing pattern emerged. The women connected to the case shared a tragic vulnerability. Many existed on the margins of society. Many could disappear without immediate public attention. Many lived lives that made them easy to overlook. And yet each missing woman represented a human being whose absence mattered. Each name represented a story interrupted. Each discovery represented a family left searching for answers. The investigation would eventually reveal a series of crimes that stretched beyond what anyone imagined on the night of November 16th. 1994. But even after arrests, confessions, forensic discoveries, and years of legal proceedings, Many questions would remain. Why had Stevenin done what he did? Were all of the victims ever identified? How many crimes had truly occurred? And perhaps most troubling of all, if Gabrielle Muster had not escaped at the toll booth that night, how much longer would the killings have continued? Some criminal investigations begin with a body. Others begin with a missing person. This one began with a survivor. A woman who recognized a fleeting opportunity and took it. A woman who ran. A woman whose decision, made in a matter of seconds, exposed secrets buried beneath the soil of northern Italy. By the time the investigation ended, Gianfranco Stevenin would become known throughout Italy as the monster of Tarazzo. His name would be associated with one of the country's most notorious serial murder cases of the 1990s. Journalists, investigators, psychologists, and legal experts would spend years examining the evidence, debating his mental state, and trying to understand the man behind the crimes. Yet before the headlines, before the trials, before the excavations and courtroom arguments, there was only a dark road, a terrified woman, and a desperate sprint towards safety. That sprint would change everything. Because hidden beneath the appearance of an ordinary farmer was a story that Italy was only beginning to uncover. And beneath the fields of Tarazzo, the dead were waiting to be found. Before investigators uncovered human remains, before courtrooms filled with lawyers and psychiatric experts, and before newspapers across Italy began referring to Gianfranco Stevenin as the monster of Tarazzo, there was another story unfolding quietly in the background. It was the story of a man who appeared ordinary. And it was the story of several women whose disappearances initially failed to reveal the horrifying connection that linked them together. Like many notorious criminal cases, the Stevenin investigation forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. The most dangerous individuals do not always appear dangerous. They do not always fit society's image of a monster. Sometimes they live in plain sight, surrounded by neighbors who see nothing unusual. Sometimes they spend years building a life that looks respectable from the outside while concealing something entirely different beneath the surface. To understand how this case developed, it is necessary to look first at the setting, the people involved, and the circumstances that allowed the crimes to remain hidden for as long as they did. Gianfranco Stevenin was born on October 2nd, 1960, in the Veneto region of northern Italy. By the early 1990s, he was living in Tarazzo, a small community in the province of Verona. The area was known for its agricultural landscape, open fields, and rural character. Life moved at a slower pace than in Italy's major cities. Farms and family properties formed an important part of the local identity. Stevenin lived on a large family farm. Nothing about his public image suggested that he would one day become the subject of a major serial murder investigation. Neighbors reportedly described him as polite, reserved, quiet, the kind of person who blended naturally into the local environment. He was not known for public outbursts of violence. He was not viewed as a threatening figure. There was no obvious warning sign visible to the broader community that would have caused people to fear him. This contrast between appearance and reality would later become one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire case. Many people expect evil to announce itself. They expect it to be visible. They expect danger to come with unmistakable warning signs. The Stevenin case offered a different lesson. Sometimes the most frightening individuals are those who attract the least attention. Yet behind the image of the quiet farmer existed another side of Gianfranco Stevenin's life. A side that remained largely hidden until investigators began searching his property. According to information uncovered during the investigation, Stevenin had developed a long-standing obsession involving women, particularly sex workers. Over a period of years, he regularly sought contact with them. He photographed them, He documented them. He collected information about them. When police eventually searched his property, they discovered an enormous archive. More than 7,000 photographs of women, detailed files and records, documents containing personal information, material that demonstrated an extraordinary level of organization. At first glance, the collection may have appeared unusual, but not necessarily criminal. However, investigators quickly realized that the sheer scale of the archive suggested something deeper than a hobby. This was not a handful of photographs stored in a drawer. It was a systematic collection, a record-keeping operation, an obsession maintained over years. Every photograph represented a real person. Every file represented a human being whose life had intersected with Stevenon's. As detectives examined the material, they began asking a crucial question. Why had he preserved so much information? What purpose did these records serve? The answers would emerge only gradually. And when they did, they transformed the investigation. But to understand the significance of those discoveries, it is important to shift attention away from Stevenon and toward the women whose names would eventually become central to the case. In true crime stories, there is often a risk that the offender becomes the primary focus while the victims are reduced to brief descriptions. The reality should be the opposite. Without the victims, there is no case. Without their lives, there is no story worth telling. And without remembering them as individuals rather than statistics, an essential part of the truth is lost. Among the women connected to the investigation were Biljana Pavlovich, Claudia Pulejo, and Blaženka Smolijo. Their names would eventually appear in official findings after investigators uncovered human remains connected to Stevenon. 2 additional victims were discovered but could not be identified. Another woman, Roswitha Adlisnik, became an important figure in the investigation because she had reportedly been seen with Stevenon before disappearing. Her body was never found, and investigators remained suspicious about her fate. What linked these women together was not their personalities, backgrounds, or life experiences. The available evidence does not provide those details. What linked them was vulnerability. Several of the women connected to the case were sex workers. This fact is important because it helps explain one of the tragic dynamics often present in serial murder investigations. Individuals living on society's margins frequently face greater risks. Their disappearances may attract less immediate attention. Their daily movements may be harder to track. Their social networks may be fragmented. And because they often interact with strangers as part of their work, distinguishing between an ordinary encounter and a dangerous one can become extremely difficult. For predators, these vulnerabilities can become opportunities. That reality has appeared repeatedly throughout criminal history, not only in Italy but around the world. Cases involving violence against sex workers often reveal the same painful pattern. Victims who deserve protection instead found themselves exposed to extraordinary danger. The Stevenon case would eventually become another example. At the time these women disappeared, however, investigators did not yet possess the information needed to connect the dots. A missing person report is not automatically evidence of murder. People disappear for many reasons. Some leave voluntarily. Some relocate. Some cut ties with family members. Others become victims of accidents or unrelated crimes. Without clear evidence, it can be difficult to determine what happened. As a result, disappearances that later appear obviously connected may initially seem isolated and unrelated. This appears to have been part of the challenge facing authorities before Stevenon's arrest. The names existed. The disappearances existed. But the larger pattern remained hidden. That hidden pattern was protected by several factors. First, the victims occupied vulnerable positions within society. Second, The crimes were allegedly committed in isolated environments where witnesses were unlikely to be present. Third, the individual at the center of the investigation maintained an outward appearance of normality. The combination proved powerful. For years, the truth remained buried. Literally, the farm in Terrazzo stood as an ordinary piece of rural property. People passed by it. Neighbors lived nearby. Daily life continued. Nothing visible suggested that investigators would one day excavate the land in search of human remains. Nothing visible suggested that evidence connected to multiple disappearances might be hidden there. And yet the property would eventually become one of the most infamous crime scenes in modern Italian criminal history. When discussing the victims, it is also important to acknowledge something that often gets lost in public memory. Most people know the name Gianfranco Stevenin. Far fewer know the names Biljana Pavlovich, Claudia Pulejo, or Blaženka Smolijo. This imbalance is common in criminal cases. The offender becomes famous. The victims become footnotes. But the reality is that these women were not supporting characters in someone else's story. They were the central figures. Their lives mattered long before they became part of a criminal investigation. Their families, friends, and loved ones experienced the consequences of their disappearances long before the public learned the details of the case. For them, this was never a headline. It was a personal tragedy, a period of uncertainty, questions without answers, phone calls that never came, people who never returned. One of the most haunting aspects of missing person cases is the space between disappearance and discovery. Families live inside that uncertainty. Hope and fear exist simultaneously. Every possibility remains open. Perhaps the missing person will return. Perhaps there is an innocent explanation. Perhaps tomorrow will bring answers. Then days become weeks. Weeks become months. Months become years. The uncertainty grows heavier with time. Although the available information about the victims in this case is limited, the emotional reality of disappearance remains universal. Every missing person leaves behind unanswered questions. Every unexplained absence creates a void. As investigators would later discover, several of those unanswered questions led back to Gianfranco Stevenin. Yet at this stage of our story, that connection had not been publicly established. The women had vanished. The farmer continued living on his property. The archives of photographs and records remained hidden. The evidence beneath the ground remained undiscovered. And the investigation that would eventually expose everything had not yet begun. That is what makes the events of November 1994 so significant. Because before Gabrielle Muster escaped at the Vicenza Ovis toll booth, there was no major murder investigation centered on Gianfranco Stevenin. There was no nationwide media attention. There were no excavations. There were no courtroom battles over criminal responsibility and mental health. There was only a collection of disappearances and a man whose secret life remained concealed behind the ordinary routines of rural existence. The women connected to this case could not tell investigators what had happened to them. Their voices had been taken away. The responsibility for uncovering the truth would ultimately fall to detectives, prosecutors, forensic specialists, and one survivor who managed to escape. But before any of that happened, before the farm was searched and before the hidden evidence emerged, the story existed only as fragments. A missing woman here, another disappearance there, a quiet farmer in Terrazzo, thousands of photographs, thousands of records, and secrets waiting beneath the soil. The pieces were already on the board. No one yet understood how they fit together. That would change soon. And when it did, the investigation would reveal a reality far darker than anyone had imagined. By the evening of November 16th, 1994, None of the people involved could have known that they were approaching a moment that would eventually alter the course of a major criminal investigation in Italy. There were no headlines yet. There was no public awareness of buried remains, missing women, or a suspected serial killer living on a farm in Tarazzo. Those revelations still lay in the future. At that moment, there was only a man, a woman, a vehicle moving through the darkness of northern Italy, and a series of decisions that would determine whether one person survived the night. In many true crime cases, investigators begin their work after a victim has disappeared or after a body has been discovered. The story of Gianfranco Stevenin unfolded differently. The turning point came because someone lived. The incident that exposed everything did not begin as a murder investigation. It began as an encounter between Gianfranco Stevenin and Gabrielle Muster, according to the information later presented during the investigation. Muster was an Austrian sex worker. On the evening of November 16th, she met Stevenin under circumstances that initially appeared routine. Stevenin offered payment in exchange for nude photographs and sexual services. There was nothing about the arrangement itself that immediately suggested the events that would follow. Encounters between clients and sex workers occur every day. Most do not become matters of national attention. Most do not end with police intervention. Most do not reveal the existence of a hidden criminal world. Yet what seemed ordinary at first gradually transformed into something far more dangerous. At some point after their meeting, Stevenin drove Muster away from public areas and toward a more isolated location. Isolation is often an important factor in violent crimes. Distance from witnesses reduces the likelihood of intervention. Distance from populated areas limits opportunities for escape. Once removed from public view, a victim's options become dramatically smaller. According to the investigation, this is where the situation changed completely. Muster was allegedly restrained. She was threatened with a knife. What had begun as a commercial transaction was replaced by coercion and violence. For the next several hours, she endured an ordeal that investigators would later describe as involving violent sexual abuse and threats to her safety. The details available from the case are limited, but the broader reality is clear. Muster found herself trapped in a situation she could not easily escape. She was alone with a man who controlled the environment around her. He controlled the transportation. He controlled the location. He possessed the means to threaten her physically. Most importantly, he possessed the ability to determine what happened next. Cases involving captivity often reveal a difficult psychological challenge faced by victims. Physical escape is not always immediately possible. Resistance can increase danger. Every decision must be made under extraordinary pressure. Victims are often forced to think strategically while simultaneously managing overwhelming fear. Survival becomes a process of constant calculation. What should be said? What should not be said? Is cooperation safer than resistance? Is there an opportunity to escape? Is help nearby? Every choice carries risks. Although we cannot know every thought that passed through Muster's mind during those hours, the outcome demonstrates something important. She continued searching for a way out. She continued evaluating possibilities. She continued looking for an opportunity. As time passed, the situation remained dangerous. According to the available information, the abuse lasted for several hours. The length of the ordeal likely increased the uncertainty surrounding its outcome. For a victim trapped in such circumstances, time can become a source of both fear and hope. Fear because every additional minute creates new opportunities for harm. Hope because every additional minute also creates new opportunities for survival. At some stage during the encounter, Muster proposed a solution. She told Stevenin that she possessed substantial savings, approximately 25 million lire, and that she would give him the money if he released her. The significance of this statement goes far beyond the amount itself. Whether Muster actually intended to hand over the money is not the central issue. What matters is the strategic value of the proposal. The offer introduced a new possibility into the situation. It redirected attention away from immediate violence and toward a future reward. It created a reason to continue traveling rather than ending the encounter where it stood. In effect, the proposal bought time. Time is often one of the most valuable resources available to a victim. The longer an incident continues, the greater the chance that circumstances may change. A road may become busier. A witness may appear. A mistake may occur. An opportunity may emerge. Muster's proposal appears to have achieved exactly that. Stevenin accepted the idea. Instead of remaining in isolation, the two continued traveling. The vehicle moved toward Vicenza. Somewhere ahead lay the possibility of contact with other people. Somewhere ahead lay a chance that the balance of power might shift. Yet opportunities alone do not guarantee survival. A victim must still recognize them and act. As the vehicle approached the Vicenza Ovis toll station, conditions began to change. Unlike a remote location, a toll plaza is a place of activity. Vehicles enter and exit constantly. Employees are present. Other drivers pass through. Law enforcement officers may be nearby. For someone searching desperately for help, such an environment offers possibilities that do not exist in isolation. Still, the risks remained enormous. Attempting escape could provoke a violent reaction. Failure could make the situation even more dangerous. Success depended on timing, speed, and luck. It required recognizing a narrow window of opportunity and acting before it disappeared. Eventually, that moment arrived. The vehicle stopped near the toll station. In only a few seconds, Muster made a decision that would alter the course of the entire case. She ran. The simplicity of that sentence conceals the courage required to make it reality. Running meant committing fully to the attempt. There would be no opportunity to reconsider halfway through. Either she would reach help, or she would not. Either someone would intervene, or they would not. Yet despite those uncertainties, she acted. She opened the door and fled from the vehicle. Nearby, a police vehicle happened to be present. Muster ran directly toward it. The significance of that decision cannot be overstated. Many major criminal investigations begin because evidence is discovered. This investigation began because a victim reached safety. The officers responded immediately. Stevenin was detained. The immediate allegations involved sexual violence, threats, and related offenses. At that point, law enforcement officers believed they were confronting a serious criminal act. They had no reason to think they had interrupted the activities of a suspected serial killer. They had no reason to suspect that the arrest would eventually lead investigators to human remains. They had no reason to imagine that a quiet farm in Tarazzo would become the focus of national attention. Like many pivotal moments in criminal history, the significance of the event only became clear afterward. In retrospect, the escape appears almost unbelievable in its importance. Consider what might have happened had circumstances been slightly different. If the vehicle had not stopped where it did, if police had not been nearby, if fear had prevented Muster from acting, if Stevenin had chosen a different route, if a single decision had unfolded differently, any one of those variables could have altered the outcome dramatically. Instead, events aligned in a way that allowed a survivor to reach safety. That survival became the foundation of everything that followed. The arrest triggered investigative procedures. Investigative procedures led to searches. Searches led to discoveries. Discoveries led to evidence. Evidence led to excavations. Excavations led to human remains. Human remains led to one of the most shocking criminal cases Italy had seen in years. Yet none of that was visible on the night of November 16th. To the officers making the arrest, this was a violent criminal investigation, but not yet a murder case. To Muster, the most immediate reality was survival. She had escaped. She had found help. She was alive. The larger consequences would emerge later. In many ways, Gabrielle Muster occupies a unique place in the history of this case. Most of the women connected to Gianfranco Stevenin were unable to tell investigators what had happened to them. Their stories had to be reconstructed through evidence, forensic findings, and investigative work. Muster was different. She survived long enough to speak. She survived long enough to report what had occurred. She survived long enough to place investigators on a path that would eventually uncover the truth. The importance of survivor testimony in criminal investigations cannot be overstated. Survivors often provide the first glimpse into hidden patterns of behavior. They reveal methods, locations, habits, and risks that might otherwise remain concealed. In this case, the testimony of a survivor became the spark that illuminated a much larger darkness. Looking back now, historians of crime and investigative experts often identify the events of November 16, 1994, as the moment everything changed. Before that night, Gianfranco Stevenin was a relatively unknown farmer living in Tarazzo. After that night, he became the subject of an investigation that would expose evidence of multiple killings. Before that night, the secrets of the farm remained hidden. After that night, authorities began moving toward discoveries that would shock the nation. Before that night, the disappearances of several women remained disconnected mysteries. After that night, investigators would begin assembling the pieces into a single terrifying picture. The incident itself lasted only hours. Its consequences would last decades. As dawn approached following Muster's escape, police officers likely believed they had successfully resolved a serious violent crime. In reality, they had only opened the first chapter of a far larger story. The questions raised by the arrest would soon lead investigators to a farm in Tarazzo. On that property, they would discover evidence unlike anything they expected to find. Thousands of photographs, detailed records, personal belongings connected to women, samples preserved as trophies, and eventually, buried remains. The escape at the Vicenza Ovis toll station was not the conclusion of a nightmare. It was the beginning of an investigation that would reveal how much worse the truth really was. The woman who ran toward the police vehicle believed she was escaping one dangerous man. She could not yet know that her decision would expose years of hidden violence and uncover secrets buried beneath the soil of northern Italy. The incident was over. The investigation was about to begin. The arrest of Gianfranco Stevenin on November 16, 1994, initially appeared to be the conclusion of a violent encounter. From the perspective of the officers who intervened at the Vicenza Ovis toll station, they had successfully detained a man accused of serious sexual offenses. The victim, Gabrielle Muster, was alive. Her account could be documented. Evidence could be collected. Charges could be pursued. On the surface, the case seemed straightforward. Yet some criminal investigations possess a strange quality. Instead of becoming simpler as evidence accumulates, they become more disturbing. Every answer leads to another question. Every discovery reveals something unexpected. The investigation into Gianfranco Stevenin would follow exactly that path. What began as an inquiry into sexual violence gradually evolved into one of the most shocking serial murder investigations in modern Italian history. The transformation did not happen overnight. It happened step by step, piece by piece, through the slow and methodical work of investigators who increasingly realized they were dealing with something far larger than anyone had initially suspected. Following Stevenin's arrest, authorities began examining his background, his activities, and the property where he lived. Such procedures are routine in serious criminal cases. Detectives attempt to understand who a suspect is, where he spends his time, what habits he maintains, and whether evidence connected to the alleged offense may exist at locations under his control. At first, there was no public indication that the investigation would uncover evidence connected to multiple disappearances. The primary focus remained the allegations made by Muscher. Yet as investigators looked deeper into Stevenon's life, they encountered discoveries that immediately raised concern. The first major surprise emerged during the search of his property. Detectives found an enormous collection of photographs. Not dozens, not hundreds, more than 7,000 photographs of women. The scale of the archive was astonishing. Investigators were confronted not with a casual collection, but with something that appeared carefully maintained over an extended period of time. Thousands of images represented years of activity, years of encounters, years of documentation. The sheer volume alone demanded attention. Why would one man accumulate such an extensive archive? Why preserve so many images? Why organize and retain them for so long? The photographs were only the beginning. As investigators continued examining the property, they discovered detailed records concerning women Stevenon had encountered. According to available information, many of these records involved sex workers. The documents suggested a pattern of systematic documentation. This was not random behavior. The records indicated that Stevenon had invested significant time and effort into preserving information about the women he met. For investigators, such discoveries often represent important clues. People who maintain extensive records frequently reveal their priorities through what they choose to preserve. Documents can establish connections. They can demonstrate patterns. They can reveal relationships between individuals who might otherwise appear unrelated. In the Stevenon investigation, the records would eventually become crucial pieces of a much larger puzzle. Yet detectives still did not fully understand what they were looking at. The situation became even more troubling when authorities discovered personal belongings connected to women. On their own, such items might have been explainable. Personal possessions can pass between people for many reasons, but context matters. Thousands of photographs, detailed records, and collections of personal items together created a picture that investigators could not ignore. The discoveries suggested an unusual degree of fixation. The search produced another deeply unsettling finding. Investigators located samples of hair and body hair that had been preserved and retained. Reports later described these items as trophies or keepsakes. The discovery significantly increased concern among investigators because such collections are sometimes associated with offenders who seek to preserve reminders of victims or experiences. By this stage, detectives were confronting a growing list of troubling evidence. Yet the most important breakthrough emerged not from the photographs themselves, nor from the preserved samples, but from the names that appeared within Stevenon's records. As investigators reviewed the documentation, they noticed something alarming. Certain women whose names appeared in the files had been reported missing. Among them were Biljana Pavlovich and Claudia Pilejo. This observation changed the direction of the investigation. Missing persons cases often remain isolated until evidence establishes a connection between them. Suddenly, investigators were facing a possible link. Here was a man maintaining detailed records of women. Here was evidence suggesting an unusual fixation on those women. And here were names associated with individuals who had disappeared. Detectives could not ignore the possibility that these facts were related. The investigation intensified. Authorities began examining the connections more closely. Every document became important. Every photograph became relevant. Every item recovered from the property acquired potential evidentiary value. The emerging picture remained incomplete, but investigators increasingly suspected that the arrest of November 1994 had uncovered something much more serious than anyone had imagined. Yet even at this stage, authorities still lacked definitive proof connecting Stevenon to murder. Suspicion and evidence are not the same thing. Detectives needed facts. They needed physical evidence capable of establishing what had happened to the missing women. Months passed. Investigators continued their work. Then, in July 1995, the case entered a new and horrifying phase. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A farmer discovered a sack containing human remains near land associated with Stevenin. The discovery immediately triggered a major investigative response. Human remains transform an investigation. Questions become urgent. Search efforts expand. Resources increase. What had previously been suspicion now demanded direct examination. Authorities moved quickly. Prosecutors ordered extensive excavation efforts around the property. Investigators began searching the surrounding areas systematically. The objective was simple: determine whether additional evidence remained hidden underground. What followed shocked Italy. As excavation work progressed, investigators began uncovering more human remains. The discoveries confirmed the worst fears that had been developing since the initial search of the property. This was no longer merely an investigation into disappearances. It was now a confirmed homicide investigation involving multiple victims. The remains were found in various conditions and locations. Some had been buried. Others had been concealed inside sacks. Certain remains had been dismembered. Investigators searched areas around the farm, as well as locations near rivers and surrounding land. Each discovery added another layer to the case. Each recovery operation strengthened the evidence that multiple women had met tragic ends. The excavations transformed the farm in Tarazzo into one of the most notorious crime scenes in Italy. What had once appeared to be an ordinary agricultural property became the center of national attention. Journalists followed developments closely. The public struggled to comprehend the scale of what investigators were uncovering. Rural fields that had appeared unremarkable now concealed evidence of extraordinary violence. Forensic work became critical. Investigators needed to determine the identities of the victims. Through their efforts, authorities identified several women. Among them were Biljana Pavlovich, Claudia Pulejo, and Blaženka Smolijo. The identification process provided answers to some questions, but it also created new pain. Missing persons cases often leave families trapped between hope and uncertainty. The discovery of remains brings certainty, but it is a certainty nobody wishes to receive. For the families connected to these women, the findings confirmed devastating realities. The women they had been searching for would never return. Investigators also recovered remains belonging to two women whose identities could not immediately be established. Their names remain unknown within the available information, but their presence underscored the possibility that the full scope of the crimes might never be completely understood. Every unidentified victim represents an unfinished story. Someone knew these women. Someone cared about them. Yet investigators were unable to place names alongside all the remains they discovered. The uncertainty surrounding those unidentified victims added another haunting dimension to the case. The investigation also focused attention on another missing woman, Roswitha Adlisnik. According to investigators, she had reportedly been seen with Stevenin before disappearing. However, despite extensive efforts, her body was never found. This absence created one of the enduring questions associated with the case. Detectives suspected a connection, but the lack of physical evidence meant uncertainty remained. Her disappearance continued to linger over the investigation like an unresolved chapter. As evidence accumulated, the picture confronting authorities became increasingly clear. The women connected to the case were not isolated incidents. The pattern was undeniable. The photographs, the records, the personal belongings, the preserved samples, the remains discovered around the property. Together, they formed a body of evidence that pointed toward repeated criminal behavior over an extended period. For investigators, the challenge now involved reconstructing events that had occurred months or years earlier. Every discovery required careful analysis. Every recovered item had to be documented. Every connection had to be established through evidence rather than assumption. This process was painstaking. Complex homicide investigations often depend on patience as much as dramatic breakthroughs. Detectives must assemble countless fragments into a coherent narrative capable of surviving scrutiny. In court, the Stevenin investigation demanded exactly that level of diligence. Meanwhile, public fascination with the case continued growing. The contrast at the heart of the investigation proved difficult for many people to understand. On one side stood the image of an apparently ordinary farmer living a quiet life in rural Italy. On the other stood evidence suggesting involvement in multiple murders. The contradiction fueled intense media attention. How could someone who appeared so ordinary become associated with crimes of such magnitude? It is a question that appears repeatedly throughout criminal history. Society often assumes that extreme violence must reveal itself through obvious warning signs. Yet many offenders hide behind routines, occupations, and appearances that seem entirely normal. The Stevenin case became another example of that unsettling reality. As the investigation progressed, authorities increasingly focused on understanding not only what had happened, but also how it had remained hidden for so long. The answer appeared to involve several factors. The victims were vulnerable women. Some were sex workers. Their disappearances may not have immediately revealed a common connection. The crimes were allegedly concealed through burial and dismemberment. Evidence was hidden on private property and in isolated areas. Most importantly, the offender remained largely beyond suspicion until the survival of Gabrielle Muscher brought law enforcement directly into his life. The role of chance in criminal investigations is often uncomfortable to acknowledge. Yet chance frequently matters. A missed appointment, a witness who happens to look in the right direction, an officer present at the right place and time. In this case, a survivor's escape triggered a chain of events that ultimately exposed years of hidden crimes. Without that escape, investigators might never have searched the property when they did. The records might have remained undiscovered. The buried remains might have stayed hidden longer. The investigation into Gianfranco Stevenin demonstrates how fragile the path to truth can be. Sometimes a single decision changes everything. By the time the excavation work concluded, authorities had uncovered evidence that fundamentally transformed the case. What began as an arrest for sexual violence had evolved into one of Italy's most notorious serial murder investigations. Yet despite the shocking discoveries, another major challenge remained. Investigators had gathered evidence. They had recovered remains. They had established connections between missing women and the suspect. Now they needed answers directly from Gianfranco Stevenin himself. In the years ahead, he would offer statements that were as disturbing as they were contradictory. He would confess to certain acts. He would deny others. He would claim memory loss. He would describe events as though they belonged to a dream. And those statements would create one of the most controversial debates of the entire case. Was Gianfranco Stevenin fully responsible for his actions? Or was something else at work behind the crimes that had horrified a nation? That question would soon move from the excavation sites of Tarazzo into the courtrooms of Italy, where judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and psychiatric experts would battle over the meaning of the evidence and the future of the man known as the monster of Tarazzo. By the time the investigation into Gianfranco Stevenin reached the courtroom, the case had already become one of the most disturbing criminal scandals in modern Italian history. What had begun with the survival of Gabrielle Muscher and a seemingly straightforward arrest for sexual violence had evolved into a complex murder investigation involving multiple victims. Buried remains, thousands of photographs, personal records, and evidence recovered from a family farm in Tarazzo. Yet despite the extensive discoveries made by investigators, one crucial question still lingered. What would Gianfranco Stevenin say when confronted with the evidence? The answer, as it turned out, would be anything but simple. In many criminal cases, suspects adopt a consistent strategy. They confess, deny everything, or remain silent. Stevenon's approach was far more confusing. His statements shifted repeatedly over time. He appeared willing to acknowledge certain facts while distancing himself from their consequences. He admitted some actions while rejecting responsibility for others. The result was a series of interviews, confessions, and contradictions that would become one of the defining features of the case. On July 19, 1996, Stevenon made a significant move. He offered a partial confession. For investigators, this represented a major development. Confessions can provide insight into events that physical evidence alone cannot fully explain. They can help establish timelines, clarify relationships between victims and suspects, and reveal motives or methods. However, confessions are only useful when they are reliable. In Stevenon's case, reliability would quickly become a central issue. During his statements, he reportedly acknowledged dismembering at least 4 women. This admission alone was shocking. The investigation had already uncovered human remains connected to the case. But hearing the suspect himself discuss such acts added a new and disturbing dimension. Yet even while acknowledging dismemberment, Stevenon attempted to draw an important distinction. He denied intentional murder. According to his version of events, the women had not been deliberately killed. Instead, he claimed that their deaths occurred during what he described as extreme sexual activities or as a result of drug overdoses. The implication was clear. Stevenon sought to separate himself from the role of murderer while simultaneously admitting involvement in what happened afterward. It was a position that immediately attracted scrutiny. Investigators had spent years gathering evidence. They had excavated human remains from locations connected to him. They had discovered records, photographs, and personal items linked to missing women. Against that backdrop, claims that multiple deaths had occurred accidentally appeared difficult to accept without careful examination. Nevertheless, the legal system required authorities to consider every argument and evaluate it according to evidence rather than emotion. As questioning continued, another problem emerged. Stevenon's statements were inconsistent. At times he appeared to admit involvement. At other times he retreated from those admissions. Sometimes he claimed not to remember what had happened. On other occasions, he suggested that events felt dreamlike, as though they existed beyond his clear recollection. These contradictions created significant challenges. Investigators must determine whether a suspect's changing story reflects confusion, deception, psychological disturbance, or some combination of all three. Each possibility carries different implications. If the suspect is deliberately misleading authorities, the contradictions may indicate consciousness of guilt. If the suspect genuinely suffers from memory impairment, the inconsistencies may require a different interpretation. Determining which explanation is correct can become extraordinarily difficult. In Stevenon's case, those questions would eventually move beyond police interviews and into a much larger legal battle concerning his mental state. One particularly disturbing aspect of the investigation involved allegations that Stevenon may have engaged in sexual activity with at least one victim after death. Investigators considered this possibility based on evidence gathered during the case. The allegation added another layer of horror to proceedings that were already difficult for the public to comprehend. It also reinforced the growing perception that the crimes reflected a pattern of behavior far more complex than the accidental death explanation offered by the defendant. As legal preparations continued, the focus increasingly shifted toward a fundamental question. Was Gianfranco Stevenon fully responsible for his actions? This issue would become one of the most controversial and heavily debated aspects of the entire case. The defense advanced a specific argument. According to Stevenon's lawyers, he had previously suffered a serious motorcycle accident that resulted in brain injury. They argued that this injury affected his mental functioning to such an extent that he could not fully understand or control his behavior. In criminal law, questions of mental responsibility are among the most difficult issues courts must address. The law generally recognizes a distinction between committing an act and possessing the mental capacity to understand that act. A defendant who lacks the ability to comprehend reality or control behavior may be treated differently from one who acts with full awareness. Because the consequences are so significant, courts typically rely on expert evaluations rather than assumptions. The Stevenin case was no exception. Psychiatric specialists became central figures in the proceedings. Their task was not to determine whether the crimes had occurred. That question involved physical evidence and investigative findings. Instead, their responsibility was to evaluate Stevenin himself. Could he distinguish right from wrong? Did he understand the nature of his actions? Was he capable of controlling his behavior? The answers to these questions would influence the outcome of the trial. Experts appointed by the court reached conclusions that differed sharply from the defense narrative. According to their evaluations, Stevenin possessed normal or above-average intelligence. They found that he understood the nature of his conduct. They concluded that he retained the capacity to control his actions. Most importantly, they determined that he was criminally responsible for what he had done. These findings carried enormous weight. The psychiatric debate was no longer merely an academic discussion. It directly affected the legal future of the defendant. If the court accepted the defense position, the consequences could be dramatically different from those associated with full criminal responsibility. If the court accepted the experts' conclusions, Stevenin would face punishment as a fully accountable offender. The disagreement produced intense debate. Supporters of the defense emphasized the alleged neurological consequences of the motorcycle accident. They argued that the injury fundamentally altered his behavior and judgment. Prosecutors, meanwhile, pointed toward the extensive evidence gathered during the investigation. They emphasized the organization reflected in the photographs, records, and concealed remains. Such actions, they argued, suggested planning and awareness rather than an inability to understand reality. The courtroom became the arena where these competing interpretations collided. At the center of the debate sat a man who continued to provide inconsistent explanations for his own actions. The public followed developments closely. The case had already attracted widespread attention because of its shocking facts. Now, it also raised broader questions about criminal responsibility, mental illness, and the limits of legal accountability. Could someone commit such acts while lacking meaningful awareness of what they were doing? Or did the evidence instead point toward deliberate choices made by a fully conscious individual? Ultimately, the courts would need to decide. On January 29, 1998, the first major verdict arrived. The Court of Verona found Gianfranco Stevenin guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment. In addition to the life sentence, the court imposed 3 years of daytime solitary confinement. For prosecutors and the families connected to the victims, the ruling represented a significant moment. The court had rejected arguments that would have substantially reduced criminal responsibility. It had accepted the view that Stevenin was accountable for his actions. Yet the legal battle was not over. Major criminal cases rarely end with a single courtroom decision. Appeals are common, particularly when life sentences are involved. Defendants have the right to challenge convictions and legal reasoning. Higher courts may review evidence, procedural issues, and questions of law. The Stevenin case would prove no exception. In 1999, a dramatic development occurred. An appellate court reached conclusions that differed substantially from the earlier ruling. The court reportedly accepted arguments suggesting that Stevenin lacked sufficient mental capacity at the time of the crimes. As a result, his sentence was significantly reduced. Instead of life imprisonment, the legal consequences appeared far less severe. amounting to roughly 10 years related to the concealment and dismemberment of bodies. The decision generated controversy. For many observers, the ruling seemed difficult to reconcile with the evidence that had emerged during the investigation. The possibility that a man associated with multiple deaths and concealed remains could avoid a life sentence sparked intense debate. Once again, questions concerning mental responsibility moved to the forefront of public discussion. Was Stevenin truly incapable of understanding his actions? Or had the appellate court reached an incorrect conclusion? The controversy did not remain unresolved for long. Further legal review followed. Eventually, the appellate decision was overturned due to flaws in its legal reasoning. This development restored momentum to the prosecution's position and reopened the path toward reaffirming full criminal responsibility. The legal process continued through additional proceedings, bringing the case closer to a final resolution. On March 23, 2001, the decisive ruling arrived. The courts ultimately concluded that Gianfranco Stevenin was fully responsible for the murders. The arguments seeking to establish diminished responsibility failed to alter the final outcome. The life sentence remained in place. After years of investigations, excavations, psychiatric evaluations, confessions, denials, appeals, and legal battles, the case reached its conclusion. The judicial system had spoken. Gianfranco Stevenin would spend the remainder of his life in prison. For the families of the victims, the verdict could never restore what had been lost. Criminal trials can establish responsibility, but they cannot reverse tragedy. They cannot return loved ones. They cannot erase years of uncertainty. They cannot answer every question. What they can do is provide a measure of accountability. The final judgment in 2001 represented that accountability. Yet even as the legal proceedings ended, certain mysteries remained. Some victims remained unidentified. Questions persisted concerning the full extent of the crimes. Debate continued regarding Stevenin's claims of memory loss and confusion. Was he telling the truth when he said he could not remember? Were his contradictory statements evidence of psychological disturbance, calculated manipulation, or something in between? Those questions would continue to shadow the case long after the verdict. Still, one fact was no longer disputed within the legal system. The courts had determined that Gianfranco Stevenin understood his actions and bore responsibility for them. The man once known as a quiet farmer from Tarazzo had become one of Italy's most notorious convicted killers. The investigations were over. The appeals had run their course. The sentence was final. But the impact of the case and the questions it raised about vulnerability, violence, and hidden evil would continue to resonate long after the courtroom doors closed. When the final ruling was delivered on March 23, 2001, the legal battle surrounding Gianfranco Stevenin had finally reached its conclusion. Years of investigations, forensic examinations, excavations, psychiatric evaluations, appeals, and courtroom arguments had ended with a clear judgment. The courts determined that Stevenin was fully responsible for the murders connected to the case and would serve a life sentence. For the Italian justice system, the verdict represented the final chapter of a long legal process. For the families of the victims, however, the end of the trial did not mean the end of the story. Some consequences of crime do not disappear when a sentence is announced. They continue for years, sometimes for generations. The Stevenin case left behind more than court records and newspaper headlines. It left behind unanswered questions, painful memories, and a lasting sense of unease that still surrounds the case today. Following his conviction, Gianfranco Stevenin entered the Italian prison system to begin serving his life sentence. Unlike many notorious criminals whose names gradually disappear from public discussion after sentencing, Stevenin continued to attract attention. Part of that interest stemmed from the unusual nature of his statements. Throughout the investigation and trial, he had repeatedly altered his version of events. He confessed to some actions, denied responsibility for others, claimed memory loss, and sometimes described the crimes as though they existed in a dreamlike state. Those contradictions did not end with his conviction. From prison, Stevenin continued to make statements that generated discussion and controversy. According to reports, he maintained that he could not remember the murders. Even after the courts concluded that he was criminally responsible, he continued to insist that significant portions of the events remained absent from his memory. Whether this represented a genuine inability to remember or a refusal to fully acknowledge, responsibility became a matter of debate. The problem, of course, is that memory exists inside a person's mind. It cannot be examined directly. Investigators can compare statements to evidence. Psychiatrists can conduct evaluations. Judges can assess credibility. But no one can completely enter another person's thoughts. As a result, claims of memory loss often remain difficult to verify conclusively. In the case of Gianfranco Stevenin, the courts ultimately concluded that whatever uncertainties existed regarding memory, they did not remove his responsibility for the crimes. Yet the question continued to linger in public discussion. Was he telling the truth? Was he deceiving himself? Was he attempting to distance himself psychologically from acts too terrible to confront directly? Or was the claim simply another version of the shifting explanations that had characterized his behavior throughout the investigation? The answers remain uncertain. Another aspect of Stevenin's life after conviction attracted attention. While incarcerated, he reportedly expressed a desire to live a religious life similar to that of a Franciscan friar. The statement surprised many observers. Public fascination with criminal cases often includes a particular interest in transformation. Society wants to know whether offenders experience remorse. Can someone responsible for horrific acts genuinely change? Can a person who committed terrible crimes discover faith, repentance, or redemption? These questions appear repeatedly in discussions about long-term imprisonment. They have no simple answers. Some people view declarations of religious devotion with skepticism, particularly when they come from individuals convicted of violent crimes. Others believe that spiritual transformation remains possible regardless of past actions. In Stevenin's case, opinions differed sharply. What remained undeniable was that his stated desire for a religious life did not alter the legal reality of his situation. The sentence remained in place. In the years that followed, various efforts were reportedly made to obtain new psychiatric evaluations or seek changes to his legal status. Such attempts are not unusual in cases involving debates about mental health. Defendants and their legal representatives often pursue additional reviews, hoping that new findings might influence prison conditions or sentencing outcomes. However, in Stevenin's case, these efforts failed to change the ultimate result. The life sentence remained intact. The conclusions reached by the courts regarding his criminal responsibility continued to stand. Today, Gianfranco Stevenin remains alive and continues serving his sentence. Yet while the man himself remains incarcerated, the broader significance of the case extends far beyond his prison cell. More than 2 decades after the final verdict, the story continues to occupy a place within discussions of Italian criminal history. There are several reasons why. The first involves the striking contrast between appearance and reality. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Stevenin case was how ordinary he appeared to those around him. Public imagination often creates a specific image of a serial killer. Popular culture portrays such individuals as obviously dangerous, socially isolated, visibly disturbed, or incapable of functioning in everyday life. Reality is often more complicated. Gianfranco Stevenin lived on a farm. He was known as a farmer. Neighbors reportedly viewed him as polite and reserved. Nothing about his outward appearance immediately suggested the crimes for which he would later be convicted. This contradiction forces society to confront an uncomfortable truth. Dangerous individuals do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they cultivate ordinary lives. Sometimes they blend into their communities so effectively that suspicion never emerges until overwhelming evidence forces recognition. The Stevenin case became a powerful reminder that appearances alone reveal very little about what may exist beneath the surface. Another reason the case continues to resonate involves the victims themselves. The women connected to the investigation occupied vulnerable positions within society. Several were sex workers. Historically, crimes against such individuals have often received less attention than crimes involving more socially privileged victims. Their disappearances may not generate immediate national headlines. Their daily lives may place them in contact with strangers whose identities are difficult to trace. Their vulnerability can make them attractive targets for predators. The Stevenin investigation highlighted this reality with painful clarity. Looking back on the case, it becomes impossible to ignore the importance of the women whose names emerged during the investigation. Biljana Pavlovich, Claudia Pulejo, Blazenca Smolio. Two unidentified women whose identities remain absent from the available information. Roswitha Adlisnig, whose disappearance continues to raise questions because her body was never found. These women were not merely evidence in a criminal proceeding. They were human beings. They had lives that existed long before they encountered Gianfranco Stevenin. They had histories, relationships, ambitions, fears, and hopes. Yet, like many victims in serial murder cases, they risk becoming overshadowed by the notoriety of the offender. One of the responsibilities of examining such cases is resisting that imbalance. The story should not belong solely to the perpetrator. The victims deserve to remain at the center of the narrative. Their losses are the reason the case matters. Their absence is the reason the investigation occurred at all. The case also remains significant because of the extraordinary role played by a survivor. In many serial murder investigations, there is no surviving witness capable of describing what happened. The crimes are reconstructed after the fact through forensic evidence and investigative work. The Stevenin case unfolded differently. Gabrielle Muster survived. Her escape on November 16, 1994, changed everything. It is impossible to discuss the aftermath of this case without acknowledging the significance of that moment. Had Muster not escaped, investigators may never have entered Stevenin's world when they did. The searches might never have occurred. The records might never have been examined. The buried remains might have remained hidden for a longer period of time. The true scope of the crimes might have taken years longer to emerge, or perhaps might never have been fully uncovered at all. History often turns on moments that appear insignificant while they are happening. A person opens a door. A person makes a phone call. A person decides to run. In this case, a split-second decision at a toll station ultimately exposed years of hidden violence. That reality has led many criminologists and investigators to view Muster's survival as one of the most pivotal moments in the entire case. Yet, even after convictions and forensic discoveries, certain mysteries remain. The existence of unidentified victims raises obvious questions. Who were they? What circumstances brought them into contact with Stevenin? Are there family members somewhere who never learned the full truth about what happened? The absence of definitive answers leaves part of the story incomplete. The same is true of Roswitha Adlisnik. Investigators suspected a connection between her disappearance and Stevenin, but her body was never recovered. Cases involving missing persons often contain such unresolved elements. Even after years of investigation, certainty remains elusive. Some questions simply outlive the legal process. Perhaps the most enduring mystery concerns Stevenin himself. What truly existed inside the mind of the man who became known as the monster of Terrazzo? Courts determined that he was criminally responsible. Psychiatric experts concluded that he understood his actions and possessed the ability to control them. Yet understanding legal responsibility is not the same thing as fully understanding motive. Why did he maintain thousands of photographs? Why preserve records so meticulously? Why collect personal items and physical samples? Why continue offering contradictory explanations even when confronted with overwhelming evidence? The available facts establish what happened. They do not necessarily explain every aspect of why it happened. This gap between evidence and understanding is common in major criminal cases. Human behavior is complex. Some offenders leave detailed explanations. Others remain enigmatic even after decades of investigation. Stevenin belongs largely to the latter category. His statements frequently generated more confusion than clarity. His claims of memory loss left many observers unconvinced. His shifting narratives created uncertainty rather than insight. As a result, part of the case remains psychologically opaque. We know what investigators discovered. We know what the courts concluded. But the complete inner reality of the man responsible may never be fully understood. In the end, the story of Gianfranco Stevenin is not simply a story about a convicted serial killer. It is a story about hidden danger. It is a story about vulnerable victims. It is a story about the importance of persistence in criminal investigations. Most of all, it is a story about how a single act of survival exposed years of buried secrets. If one image captures the entire case, it is not an excavation site, a courtroom, or a prison cell. It is the image from the beginning of our story. A vehicle approaching the Vicenza Ovis toll station on a cold November night. A frightened woman sitting inside. A moment of decision. A door opening. Footsteps striking the pavement. A desperate sprint towards safety. At the time, nobody could have known that those few seconds would unravel one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern Italy. Nobody could have known that hidden beneath the fields of Terrazzo lay evidence waiting to be discovered. Nobody could have known that the quiet farmer at the center of the story would eventually become known throughout the country as the monster of Terrazzo. But history would remember that moment. Because sometimes the difference between a hidden crime and a revealed truth comes down to one person finding the courage to run. And in the case of Gianfranco Stevenin, that courage ensured that the victims would not remain forgotten beneath the soil forever. Years after the courtrooms emptied, years after the excavators stopped digging through the soil around the farm in Terrazzo, and years after the headlines gradually faded from the front pages of Italian newspapers, the case of Gianfranco Stevenin continues to occupy a unique place in the history of crime in modern Italy. Not because it was the deadliest serial murder case the country has ever seen. Not because every mystery was solved. And not because investigators uncovered every answer they were searching for. The case endures because it embodies one of the most unsettling realities that true crime can reveal. The most frightening dangers are often the ones hidden in plain sight. The farm at the center of the investigation was not an abandoned building standing alone in the wilderness. It was not a secret compound concealed deep within an inaccessible landscape. It was part of an ordinary community. People lived nearby. Daily life unfolded around it. Seasons changed. Crops grew. Families worked. Vehicles passed along local roads. The rhythms of ordinary existence continued uninterrupted while, beneath the surface, evidence of terrible crimes remained hidden. This contrast between the familiar and the horrifying is one of the reasons the case remains so disturbing decades later. Human beings naturally seek reassurance in patterns. We tell ourselves that danger should be visible. We want to believe that violence leaves clear warning signs. We prefer a world in which monsters look like monsters. The story of Gianfranco Stevenin challenges that assumption. By all available accounts, the public image he presented was remarkably ordinary. He was known as a farmer. Neighbors reportedly described him as polite and reserved. He did not publicly display the image that society often associates with notorious killers. Yet the investigation ultimately revealed a vastly different reality. That reality forced many people in Italy to confront a difficult question. How well do we truly know the people around us? The answer is rarely comforting. Every person contains private thoughts, private fears, private desires, and private histories that remain invisible to the outside world. Most people live ordinary lives that never threaten anyone. But occasionally, a hidden life conceals something far darker. The Stevenin case became a powerful example of how extreme violence can coexist with outward normality for years before discovery. It also became a case study in vulnerability. Looking back, one of the most tragic aspects of the investigation involved the identities of the victims. Several of the women connected to the case were sex workers. Throughout history, individuals working at the margins of society have often faced elevated risks of violence. They frequently encounter strangers. They may have fewer protections available to them. Their disappearances can be overlooked or misunderstood. Their vulnerability can be exploited by those seeking victims who are less likely to generate immediate public alarm. The victims connected to the Stevenin case deserve to be remembered not because of how they died, but because of who they were before their lives intersected with a killer. Biljana Pavlovich, Claudia Pulejo, Blazenca Smolio. The two women whose identities remain unknown in the available record. Roswitha Adlisnig, whose disappearance continues to cast a shadow over the case because her body was never found. These names represent real lives, not merely entries in a police file. They represent individuals whose futures were stolen. When people discuss serial murder cases, there's often a temptation to focus exclusively on the offender. Books, documentaries, and news reports frequently devote enormous attention to the criminal while reducing victims to brief summaries. Yet the true tragedy of these cases lies not in the existence of the killer, but in the loss of the people whose lives were taken. Every victim had a story that existed before the crime. Every victim mattered to someone. Every victim left behind an absence that could never be filled. In this sense, the most meaningful legacy of the investigation is not the notoriety of Gianfranco Stevenin, but the fact that the victims were eventually found. Justice cannot reverse death. It cannot restore stolen years. It cannot erase suffering. But it can uncover truth. It can replace uncertainty with answers. And in cases involving missing persons, that distinction matters profoundly. For families searching for loved ones, uncertainty can become its own form of torment. The mind continuously generates possibilities. Hope and fear coexist. Questions multiply. The discovery of what happened may bring devastating news, but it also ends the endless cycle of not knowing. One of the reasons the Stevenin investigation remains significant is that it transformed disappearances into answers. Painful answers, certainly, but answers nonetheless. Another enduring lesson of the case concerns the role of chance in criminal investigations. Modern society often imagines that crimes are solved through advanced forensic science alone. Popular media emphasizes technology, databases, and laboratory analysis. While those tools are important, many investigations still hinge upon unpredictable human moments. The Stevenin case provides a striking example. The investigation that ultimately uncovered multiple victims began because one woman survived and escaped. Gabrielle Muster's actions on November 16, 1994, altered the course of history. Had she remained trapped, the timeline of events might have been entirely different. The hidden evidence might have remained undiscovered for a much longer period. Additional victims might never have been identified. The farm might never have attracted the same level of scrutiny. It is impossible to know exactly what would have happened under different circumstances. What is clear is that her survival became the catalyst for everything that followed. There is a tendency in retrospective storytelling to make historical events seem inevitable. Once we know the ending, we begin viewing earlier events as steps leading naturally toward that conclusion. Reality is rarely so straightforward. At the moment Muster escaped, nobody knew that buried remains would eventually be discovered. Nobody knew that investigators would uncover thousands of photographs and detailed records. Nobody knew that the case would become a national sensation. The future remained unwritten. Yet, because one person acted decisively in a moment of danger, the path of the investigation changed forever. In many ways, this may be the most important lesson of the entire story. Acts of courage are often measured not by certainty of success, but by willingness to act despite uncertainty. Muster had no guarantee that she would reach safety. She had no guarantee that police would be close enough to help. She had no guarantee that escape would succeed. Yet she acted anyway. The consequences extended far beyond her own survival. The years following the conviction also highlighted another recurring issue in criminal justice: the debate over mental responsibility. Throughout the legal proceedings, courts were asked to consider whether Stevenen's behavior could be explained by impaired mental functioning allegedly connected to a previous motorcycle accident. Psychiatric experts evaluated him. Lawyers argued over competing interpretations. Judges examined the evidence. Ultimately, the legal system concluded that he understood his actions and retained the capacity to control them. Yet the debate itself remains instructive. Society often seeks simple explanations for horrific crimes. We want a single answer capable of transforming chaos into understanding. Mental illness, brain injury, childhood trauma, personality disorders, social isolation, each is sometimes offered as a complete explanation. Reality is usually more complex. Human behavior emerges from numerous interacting factors, many of which remain difficult to measure. The Stevenen case demonstrates both the necessity and the limitations of psychiatric analysis. Experts can evaluate mental functioning. Courts can determine legal responsibility. Yet understanding why a person committed a crime is not always the same as understanding how that person thinks. Even after decades of scrutiny, aspects of Stevenen's inner motivations remain unclear. His changing statements, his claims of memory loss, and his contradictory explanations never fully resolved the deeper questions surrounding his actions. Some mysteries survive even after a conviction. That uncertainty is frustrating, but it is also an important reminder of the limits of human knowledge. Not every question receives a satisfying answer. Not every criminal provides a truthful explanation. Sometimes the evidence establishes what happened while the reasons remain partially hidden. In the end, perhaps the most haunting image associated with this case is not the courtroom, the prison, or even the excavation sites. It is the image of buried evidence lying undisturbed beneath ordinary ground. For months and years, the landscape appeared unchanged. People looking at those fields saw only farmland. They saw soil, vegetation, and the familiar features of rural life. They did not see the secrets hidden below. The metaphor extends beyond this particular case. Human beings often move through life assuming that what they can see represents the full truth. Yet reality frequently contains hidden layers. Investigations, whether criminal or personal, are often journeys beneath the surface. They reveal what was concealed. They expose what others failed to notice. The story of Gianfranco Stevenen is ultimately a story about those hidden layers. It is about the gap between appearance and reality. It is about vulnerability and survival. It is about persistence in the search for truth. Most of all, it is about the importance of remembering the people whose lives were lost. Today, Gianfranco Stevenen remains in prison. serving the life sentence imposed by the Italian courts. The legal process has ended. The verdict is final. Time continues to move forward. Yet the case remains part of Italy's criminal history because it speaks to concerns that transcend any single investigation. How do predators hide? Why are vulnerable people often targeted? What responsibilities do societies have toward those living at the margins? How can investigators identify patterns before more lives are lost? These questions remain relevant long after the headlines disappear. The fields of Tarazzo have long since returned to silence. The excavators are gone. The search teams have departed. The court proceedings exist now in records and archives. But the lessons of the case endure. They endure in the names of the victims. They endure in the courage of the survivor who escaped. They endure in the determination of investigators who followed the evidence wherever it led. And they endure as a reminder that sometimes the most important truths are the ones hidden deepest beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough or persistent enough to uncover them. This is where the story ends, not with the killer, not with the sentence, but with the people whose lives gave the case its meaning, and with the enduring hope that even the darkest secrets can eventually be brought into the light.